Now today, today we have the shudders who normally participate in the Kagyu Gunche. And I would first like to offer my Tashdilek greetings to all of them. So today here, because of the epidemic, we have not been able to hold the Gunche. However, the Surmang Shudder, which was supposed to organize the Gunche, and Kyabje Garo Rinpoche have asked me to hold this just so that we don't entirely miss the event. And so we have arranged this program for the teaching on the Four Dharmas of Gampopa. So the Four Dharmas of Gampopa are known not only in the Kagyu tradition, but also in all of the Tibetan traditions. In many of the instructions of the Sakya, Gilu, Kagyu, and Nyingma traditions, there are the Four Dharmas are mentioned there. Now, within the collected works of Gampopa that we have now, there are several texts within the collected works of Gampopa that talk about the four dharmas, some in prose and some in verse. Some are longer and shorter. And the Drugpa Kagyu master Kunkhyen Pema Kharpo identified the text called the Teaching on the Path of the Three Individuals, the Supreme Garment of the Path, that has 12 and a half stanzas as being like the root text of the Four Dharmas. However, but within this root text, if you look at what it actually explicitly says, it says in it has these words. It says for each of the for actually the long teachings on the Four Dharmas, it says practice it within view, meditation, and conduct. And so, in other words, it mentions the Four Dharmas in each of them, but it doesn't actually identify them all clearly, and it doesn't give much explanation of them. Also, within the collected works of Gampopa, there is a text called the Four Dharmas in Brief, and there is also another one that doesn't have another text that begins with the phrase Namo Guru, the Dharma become the Dharma, and so there's another text there. So within the collected works of Gampopa, so those are the two texts in the collected works that really clearly identify each of the four dharmas and explain them. And so today, as what we will be talking about is, as I mentioned before, is the one that I mentioned before that has the title, The Four Dharmas in Brief. That is the one that we'll be speaking about. Jamgon Lodro Thaye also included that in his Treasury of Precious Instructions. So those are the ones that were actually written by Gampopa that are in his collected works. In addition, Gomtsul wrote a commentary on the one that I mentioned before that is in 12 and a half stanzas. And also another direct disciple of Gampopa named Lho Layakpa also wrote root texts on the Four Dharmas and a summary of them. And there's also one by the Pema Drugpa. And so there are many complete commentaries on these. And so these are very important for spreading the. So this one by Lho Layakpa was also very important for spreading the teachings, and is very kind to later generations. There are also several commentaries that were actually written by J. Pema Drugpa. What we first really need to pay attention to, it's like, as I mentioned before, we have a Gampopa. There are the text in the texts that are actually written directly by Gampopa in his collected work, and also the commentaries written by his direct disciples. So that the Four Dharmas is written by them, and then also there is the text that we normally write. They're a little bit different. There's some differences in the actual words in these Four Dharmas. For example, later, generally in later times, the first of the Four Dharmas is in later times generally known as "May my mind become the Dharma." But in the old texts, what it says is "May the Dharma become the Dharma." It doesn't say "May my mind become the Dharma." It says "May the Dharma become the Dharma." And there basically isn't any that says "May my mind become the Dharma." And so Karmapa Rinchen Darje wrote a short commentary on the Four Dharmas, and within that, what he said is, so at the time of the fifth Karmapa Deshin Shepa, it changed. So that is what Karmapa Khenchen says. Now, it's difficult to get the entire collected works of Deshin Shekpa, but there are instructions on Mahamudra by a direct student of Deshin Shekpa named Mase Tokten, and this is in the Treasury of Precious Instructions. And this, it says, "May my mind become the Dharma." And so it seems that the Karmapa Khenchen's teaching may well be authentic and good and may have sources, but this is something that we can look at it carefully over the next few days, and so I don't need to speak too much about it today. So in brief, when we talk about the Four Dharmas of Gampopa, or you can also call it the four striking the points. So within these, it includes all of the points of the three types of individuals as taught in the Kadampa tradition. And it also summarizes all the main points of the Kagyu, of the union of the Kagyu, of the Mahamudra and Kadampa traditions. So in general, it includes all the teachings of the main points of the sutras and the Tantra traditions. This is like a summary of all of these traditions. And so for that reason, so being students of the or followers of the Dapa Rinpoche, it is really important for us to know the main points of these 4 points. It's something that we absolutely have to know. So I'd like to take this opportunity to teach these. I think it's good for me to take this opportunity to teach the Four Dharmas of Gampopa. But first of all, but before we speak about the Four Dharmas themselves, we usually call ourselves Kagyu or Drugpa Kagyu. We say this, but what is Kagyu? And if I say, please explain it, I think a lot of people wouldn't be able to explain it. For example, and if you say, why are you a Kagyu? And if you ask someone that, there's someone who would probably say, oh, my parents had faith in the Kagyus. And when I was little, I became a monk in a Kagyu monastery. And so for that reason, that's why I'm a Kagyu. So that's what we think. So, first of all, we need to first of all think about what does it mean to be Kagyu? What does Kagyupa mean? So generally, if we think about if we take a broad, a vaster understanding of the word Kagyu or the name Kagyu, the first syllable is the word ka, which means words. And what we need to understand this as, this means between the conjured and the tenjured, this means the conjured, the collected words of the Buddha. So this means the words of the Buddha or the teachings of the Buddha. So that's what we should understand it as meaning. Ju means lineage. And what we should understand this as saying, it's being a lineage that is passed down uninterrupted from one master to the next. So when you say when you join the two words together, it means it should be understood as gurus to transmit the words of the Buddha, the three Pitakas, the four tantras and so forth to disciples, and the disciples holding that lineage, and it happening in an unbroken series. And so if you think about it in that way, then everyone who upholds a Buddhist lineage could be called a Kagyupa. We could say this. I think it's appropriate to say that. And so for this reason, in Tibet, the Kadampas were sometimes called the Jowo Kagyu. And later, there is the Gadam. There are people in the hearing lineage of the hermit and the Gelugpa lineage who are called the Gaden Kagyu. And also there was a lineage passed down from Bodong Penchen, and that was called the Bodong Kagyu. And so in this way, there are many different lineages that were called by the name Kagyu. But these days, as what's generally known today, when we talk about Kagyu, we think about a particular lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, and we understand it as a name for that lineage. To give an example, if you had three monks, one from the Sakya, one from the Gelug, and from the Nyingma tradition who came, and you asked them all, and say, what Dharma tradition are you from? They'd say, oh, I'm Sakya, I'm Gelug, I'm Nyingma. That's what they'd say. But they wouldn't say, I'm Kagyupa, would they? But when they're saying, I'm not Kagyu, it means if it's saying, I'm not someone who's holding the lineage of the Buddha's teachings, that's not what they're saying. It's what that's not what they're saying. What they're thinking is that the Kagyu means the name of a particular Dharma lineage, and I'm not part of that lineage. So that's what they're saying. So if we talk about the main point here, the way that a word is used and the way that it's understood has changed. And so that sometimes so we're just not understanding it in the same way. But in the actuality, in terms of being people who uphold the teachings of the tradition of the words of the Buddhas, there is no difference at all. So if we understand it, that is important. That's good. But today, in terms of the way we generally talk about it, it's generally known. A Kagyu, what we understand it as, a Kagyupa this means the instructions passed down from or the tradition of the instructions passed down from Tilopa, the four transmissions or the different instructions from different traditions. He passed them to Naropa, and he heard all the instructions. Naropa heard all the instructions, and then he taught them to Marpa the translator. Marpa the translator then brought them to Tibet, and he established these teachings by teaching, listening, and meditation. And then there's passed this down to Milarepa and so forth. And so there's been an unbroken lineage of masters and disciples from them, and that is what we call the Kagyu. So I mentioned the 4 oral transmissions, right? So when I talk about the 4 oral traditions, there are different ways that they're explained within the Kagyu tradition itself. But today I won't speak about that at length. I think it's better not to speak about that first. In any case, all 4 of these 4 traditions are lineages that originate from the Buddha Vajradhara. And so I think that they all come from the words of the Buddha. So they all are considered the words of the Buddha. So if we think about it on a larger level, it's towards the words of the Buddha. And if we think about it here in this context, and if we think about it in a more limited sense, as I'm talking, if we think about it in terms of tradition coming from Vajradhara, because they all come from the lineage of Vajradhara, so that there's no contradiction between that and my previous explanation about the meaning of the word ka, or words of the Buddha. Now, in the Drugpa Kagyu tradition, when they talk about the Kagyu, they call it the Karju. They spell it differently. It's Karju, not Kagyu. But within the Kagyu, most Kagyu traditions and in other traditions, the spelling that we usually use, the Kagyu, is the more commonly used. So in brief, so basically the source of the Kagyu tradition is from India, and so it came from Telopa and Naropa and Maitrapa. And there are many such great masters upholding this lineage in India. Marpa the translator became a student of Naropa, and then he brought it for the first time to Tibet. And so that's where the Kagyu teachings first were brought to Tibet. Marpa had many students, but among the most famous of them is Jetsun Milarepa. And Jetsun Milarepa's student, he had many students, including Rechungpa and so forth. And among the different many students, but the main student, or this disciple who was like the sun, was Lord Gampopa. And so it passed down from them. So because it passed down from these 3, so all these three, Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa, were called the 3 Kagyu forefathers. So I'm talking about our grandfather and the great-grandfather, and it's like we're talking about the ancestors or forefathers in our own familial lineage. And so the same when they're Kagyu, but we talk about the foundation of the teaching in terms of Tibet would be these 3, Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa. And among these 3, Lord Gampopa it was special among them. He's like the founder of the Drugpa Kagyu lineage. So now when we talk about the Kajupa and Kagyu, and when it means that like the lineage of the teachings, of the Kagyu teachings that was spread by Lord Gampopa. And so for Gampopa had many different names. But the most well-known of them are primarily 2 names. The first is Drugpa Rinpoche. and one is Lord Gampopa. Takpo is the name of a place. Gampo means the name of a mountain. So it's like the Lama was called by the name of the place or by the name of the mountain. And his students who upheld his lineage and his followers and became called the Drugpa Kagyu. And so there was a tradition of calling them that. Of course, before Gampopa, before he was even born, there was, of course, a Kagyu lineage, wasn't there? There was the Marpa and Milarepa and so forth had already appeared. But later, the Kagyupas were primarily called the Drugpa Kagyu. That's what they're called, but they're not called the Marpa Kagyu or the Mila Kagyu. The tradition of calling them that has not really spread. And so what's the reason for this? So generally, when we talk about the Drugpa Kagyu, the root of it, or the source of it, is of course comes down to Marpa and Milarepa. However, but Lord Gampopa, in addition to having the pith instructions passed down from Marpa and Milarepa, Gampopa, there were also the instruction of a well-known Tibetan lineage called the Kadampa lineage. And so there's he also practiced the tradition of the three paths of the individual in the Kadampa tradition. And he also had all of the instructions on means of liberation from the Mahamudra tradition of Milarepa and the traditions of the three individuals from the Kadampa tradition. He turned out and he used these in union to guide tradition. And in terms of establishing a regime and way of doing things, and so because of his activity, he was able to bring a even greater power to spread the teachings of the Kagyu tradition. And so for that reason, in Tibet, we call it the Drugpa Kagyu, and that became the most well-known name for the lineage. When we talk about the Drugpa Kagyu, it's like an overall name for all of the Kagyu lineages. And so that is how that occurred. When we say Kagyupa, we normally immediately understand it as the Drugpa Kagyu. And for this to happen, and Milarepa said to Gyalwang, Milarepa said, from my Milarepa's practice lineage, your Drugpa Kagyu will arise. Also, in Drugpa Rinpoche, Milarepa said I am a yogi, but after me there will be many monastics who come. And this Gampopa, the Lhaje Trungpa, will bring benefit to infinite sentient beings. So he also did great things for the Buddhist teachings, and so he praised the teaching, praised Gampopa very broadly. And so this is also very clear in the teachings, in the texts of Gampopa. So when we talk about Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa, among these three, the one of these three forefathers who had the greatest activity and deeds, or the widest activity and deeds, and the one who primarily spread the teaching of the Kagyu lineage was primarily Gampopa. And the reason why he was able to have such a vast activity to benefit sentient beings, or the situation that allowed this to happen, if we think about that. So generally, there are, of course, many evident and many hidden different situations. So if we think about the hidden things, the hidden situations is previous aspirations and bodhicitta. But these are things that we ordinary individuals cannot understand. But in terms of the general way it appears, the common appearance. So we ask, what was like Marpa, Lord Marpa like? So Lord Marpa was basically, he was a village elder. And so when Milarepa came to look for Marpa, when he came to Lhochak to look for Marpa, and he asked, where is the king of translators, Marpa the translator? And he asking this, what they said is, we've never heard about any king of translator Marpa, but there is Uncle Lodro. So there was that question. So there was that discussion. So if you look at it, he was basically just a village elder. So that's what the histories show. And similarly, there were a few students who came to him, such as Milarepa. Milarepa came from Lhasa down to Lhotro. And when he arrived on Lhotro, he gave him the 5th instructions of the secret mantra liberation and ripening, but he didn't start a monastery or start a regime or a system for starting a monastery. Then there's nothing like that in the histories. Likewise, when you talk about the 9-story tower, the Sekar, so these were basically just his own private residence. It was not called by the name of a monastic seat. Calling it a seat occurred later. So calling so at that time it was just his own, it was Marpa's own private residence. It was not called a seat. And Lord Marpa was even more carefree than that. Even had even less to do. He would go from mountain to mountain and stay in the mountains. He spent 42 years in the mountains, it is said. In any case, he stayed in no fixed location, and he went from one to the other. And when he left to someplace, the students, there was a few students, receptive students who took to him. He didn't stay in a single place and gather a retinue of students. He didn't do that sort of activity. Not only did he not do that, if like a sort of establishing a monastery or a basis and gathering students like that, it's not something he liked. Likewise, Milarepa, after he left someplace, he would say, Milarepa went here, and if you go look at them, they're just like empty caves, empty mountains, empty valleys. There's not even a house that you can point to. But later, in later times, they did build monasteries or their monuments in this place, but that only occurred later. At that time, while Milarepa was alive, that did not occur. Now, Gampopa himself, it was different from either Marpa or Milarepa. The main thing that is different is that he was his support or his basis. The two, Marpa and Milarepa, were both lay people. But Gampopa was monastic, and because he was a monastic, when he was in his 20s, he went forth and entered monastic discipline, and not only that, at that time, he went to the region of Pempa and U, where there was a great emphasis on pure monastic discipline, and became a entered a Kadampa monastery. And so within these Kadampa monasteries, he lived there, and he studied many Kadampa instructions.
Now,
when he went to see Milarepa, he spent 13 months with Milarepa. And after spending 13 months with Milarepa, but even then, he went and studied with many Kadampa teachers. At that time in Tibet, you either only practiced Tantra or only practiced Sutra. So that was the very widespread custom in Tibet at that time. But Gampopa practiced the Sutra and Tantra in union. Or he had the practice that he had done as when he was younger of the Kadampa and the instructions on method and liberation that he received from Milarepa, and he practiced them together in union, not discarding either of them. They practiced the two in union. So later, Lord Milarepa, as Lord Milarepa had instructed, he went to Dhala Gompa in Tibet, and at that place, he founded a monastery and retreat, and he stayed there permanently. And so once he'd settled there permanently, later, students came from Utsang and Kam. So he gathered many students from these regions. And when they gathered there, when he taught these students, the way he gave the instructions is that for the common, or in his Dharma talks, he primarily talked about the paths of the three types of individuals from the Kadampa tradition. And when he gave the instructions in these, he emphasized impermanence, the defects of samsara, karma, cause and effect, and so forth. And then once you had really trained your being, then only then he gave the teachings on the Tantra and the feed for a minute.
Mila pare pembadi and Kadambala dene pentobains. Naru Dama Sheba Mande, Kadam da Mandena, Pemba Pa Nyung session, the Nisson. Tagaresana, the Kadatata, Milia dos pentoyevati, Cho Kadambala dene, pentoyon de dos. Jenarobe Dama de Sheba Jasha already, Iminia, Kadambe Mengada.
Fading. And so what Milarepa said is that if you first train yourself in the Kadampa tradition and then practice the Tantra, if you train yourself first, then there is greater benefit for this. And then in addition to that, another special factor about Gampopa is that at the previous times at the time of Marpa and Milarepa is that they primarily follow the path of means. They use tumo and other means. But from Gampopa, also called the teaching the Prajnapada, and called that the co-emergent yoga, and said that so that you could practice, and so without using empowerments and so forth. But he pointed out the nature of the mind to many young students directly by doing it. So in this way, there was this is when we talked about the sutra tradition of Mahamudra and also the path of liberation of Mahamudra. And so from that time, there was some student geshes who had studied philosophy, who had studied the sutras, and and he said we've had many students who had studied philosophy, and Gampopa has wasted them. And so there are many who criticized him or spoke down about him at that time. And what Gampopa said about that is he said, some philosopher Geshe said, Gampopa has let many bright students go to waste. So they're criticizing me, but those students in the future will certainly be able to benefit us students. And so it is in the histories that that Gampopa said this. There was also a Gyalwang Sampa. Gyalwang Sampa was the master of the hearing lineage of Reichungpa. He was one of the main students of Reichungpa. First of all, he was a Kadampa Geshe, and later he became the main student of Reichungpa. And he also took teachings from Gampopa and was a student of Gampopa's. So Gyalwang Sampa, he was a student who had studied philosophy, and so at first, what he thought to himself is that Gampopa he's not making them study at all. He doesn't make them study at all, and only teaches them meditation to get them to pointing out it. He's only teaching this, and because he's doing this, and if you're doing that, it's a bit. I wonder if they're ever going to develop any qualities. I don't know if they're going to learn anything from them. Are they going to improve at all? And so he had this sort of doubt. I would have that sort of doubt. So one day, then the day he had that thought, and then that night he had a dream. He had a very particular dream. And so the dream was that there's the Dahala Gampo mountain. It was filled with meditation caves, and within each of these meditation caves, there were precious stupas, and most of them were finished, were really beautiful, high quality, and they radiated light that filled the sky. And so all of them, a few of them were like half built, and some of them they were not completely done, but they're kind of like the shape of a stupa, but they weren't done. But many people were prostrating. And what the people who are prostrating saying is, these are worthy of offerings from the whole world of gods and humans. And so he dreamt that many people were prostrating and saying this. And when he dreamed this, then the next day, Gyalwang Sampa decided, I thought, I need to go talk to Gampopa about that. And the day he thought about this, he had that doubt in the daytime, and then immediately the next night he had a really good dream, and so he had he was kind of surprised, and so he went to see Gampopa. So he first prostrated. So he got to see Gampopa and he prostrated, and he had something that I thought, I need to say this to Gampopa. But even before he could say anything, Gampopa said to him, generally, you philosophers are really hard on me, especially you. Now, you have been criticizing me, haven't you? That I've been so why am I giving them meditation instructions of being? Why am I doing it? You're criticizing me about this. Why? But in your dream, but it's exactly as it was in your dream. It's exactly as you dreamt in your dream. These young monks that I'm teaching, they used to be beggar children, and now they're going to be worthy of in the future they'll be worthy of offerings by the world of gods and humans. So basically, everyone who comes to me, so whether they're everyone, no matter where they're from or where they're from, not caring about what level of society they're from, but whatever they want, I make it so that they can accomplish what they want to do. Some people come to me. Some people say that I'm someone who's destroying the teachings, but you think about who is the teaching, the master of the teachings, who is benefiting the teachings? Who is benefiting sentient beings? If you look at who's doing that, in the future, it'll be very clear. So it's recorded in the histories that he said this. And so Gampopa spread the teachings of the sutra tradition of Mahamudra. And he would teach everybody. He'd even teach the cowherds and the shepherds. To even teach people who had no education, give them educations, point out the nature of the mind. And they did develop realization. There's many stories about that. And also he taught many uneducated women as well. Yeah, and so it's because of the previous bodhicitta and aspirations of Buddha, because of the power of his blessings, he had a really particular way of pointing out the nature of the mind. Because he had the particular way of pointing out the nature of the mind, he was able to teach sentient beings, regardless of their age, regardless of their level of education. When he gave them the pointing out instructions of Mahamudra, they recognized the nature of their mind. So that is one particular special quality of Gampopa. Similarly, as everyone knows, so at the time of the Buddha, he was the young Chandrabhava and requested the king of Samadhi Sutra, and he was prophesied at that time to be able to benefit sentient beings, and it's just as was prophesied, as you all know. And so in this way, Gampopa Rinpoche, so this is said, and one time when he had a gathering of his students, he said, Gampopa said, once at the time of I remember at the time of the Buddha, I was the young Chandrabhava, and I requested the King of Samadhi's Sutra from the Bhagavan. And I made the commitment that I would in the future spread the teachings of the Sutra. And as the Buddha prophesied that I would spread the teachings, and in the same way, I've now brought you to the Samadhi of Mahamudra, and I have performed a great deed for the benefit of the Buddha's teachings. Similarly, in Shangtsalpa's teachings, it says, Jesus said that in general, the secret mantra is the path of blessings. It is the lineage of Naropa. It's also lineage of Naropa. Is particular. But many people, when it's pointed out the ordinary mind, the nature of the mind, but they don't have confidence, they don't feel comfortable with it. They look for many different instructions of the sutras and tantras and learn these different pith instructions and do many different hurried things, but it's difficult for them to recognize the nature of their mind. But the actual lineage where the wisdom of blessings dawns from within and you take perception of the path is actually the one who upholds this lineage is the precious Guru Gampopa. So it is certain that he said that at this time that it must have been a nirmanakaya of the Buddha or an emanation of the Buddha in this degenerate time. And so Shangtsalpa praised the Gampopa in this way. So when we talk about Gampo, we talk about the sutra traditions of Mahamudra, and when we talk about the Mahamudra that we talk about these days, we are primarily talking about the co-emergent yoga of pith instructions of co-emergent yoga taught by Gampopa. And so he was the spreading of the teachings of Mahamudra, and in particular the teachings of Sutra Mahamudra, started from Gampopa, and this is like a special aspect of his activity. However, so if you wonder, well, did Gampopa not practice the secret mantra? But of course he did practice this secret mantra. If we look at the collected works of Gampopa, there are a lot of pith instructions on the secret mantra of creation and completion phases. And he also did, pointed out the nature of Mahamudra through the path of means taught by Milarepa. And he also founded there's also Kunkhyen Kempa, the founder of the practice lineage of the Karma Kamsam. And he received all the instructions from Lord Gampopa, and so he also had the practice of secret mantra. So if you say, did Gampopa not practice the secret mantra? And it said no. No, he did practice the secret mantra. When Gampopa went to Milarepa, he primarily practiced. He spent a year practicing on Tummo. He spent 13 months with Milarepa, and during that time, and 12 of those months, he spent meditating on Tummo. And so there was no need to mention that he practiced the secret mantra. So in brief, he joined the sutra and the tantra together. And he also joined that with the teachings of in accord with the level of the disciples, with the teaching of the three paths, and he taught emphasized many different types of practice, and he taught most of his students were also monastics. Also, Dahala Gampo is a very strict monastic discipline. So, in terms of the general teaching, general traditions, he spread the teachings, and so he had activity that was different than most others. And so, for that reason, so that what I'm speaking about today, when we talk about it in our mouth, we say, I'm Kajapa, I'm Kajapa. We say that, but actually, in terms of meeting, what is a Kajapa? So that is. I thought if I could explain that, I thought it would be good to be able to give a brief introduction to that. Other than that, if we don't understand the meaning, but really get fixated on the label, and then we're only talking about the words. But the actual meaning, we need to actually look inside of ourselves and look at within ourselves and see, what is the Kajapa lineage within myself? How do I practice it? What is the view, meditation, and conduct? If we don't look at that inside us, then there's no point. So I've given a brief introduction to that, and so tomorrow, I thought I would speak about the life of Gampopa in brief. When he was born. When he passed away, what lamas he studied with, and so forth. So I thought I'd speak about that topic. And so then we'll go through things in sequence. And then we'll go through that and eventually get to the teaching on the four dharmas of Gampopa themselves. So I think we can leave it here for today.